So let's bring Chuck Pierce on. Chuck, I think, is one of the, as far as I count in the world, preeminent and prominent Issachars. And, you know, to me, if he gets a word, you can just take it to the bank that it's going to happen like that. And so, Chuck, you received some real revelation about this year. And would you just share that with us? Thank you for taking your time to get on.
And thank all of you for being here. And first of all, Mike, you and Cindy, you know what you mean to me. I listened carefully. Cindy gave me a word in January that said, you're not going to be going on the road like you have been. I mean, it was on January, I think, 2nd or 3rd. And I thought, after 578,000 miles, how would that work? And it worked. And so, so I just thank God for the warning, and it's been really interesting. So what the Lord did for me, I always start looking at where we're headed into, the time frame we're heading into. And I started looking at that in August of last year, and I noticed several words intersecting. And this is what brought me into an understanding of the time we're in. And all of you listening, we know we have so many on this broadcast. You have to use the Spirit and the Word to come into a reality together. And so I want to encourage you as you listen to do that. And the Lord showed me that we were entering into a new era. And of course, in this new era, I always look at it from a Hebraic standpoint and from our cultural standpoint. So I looked at it from 5780, I looked at it from 2020, and I started foreseeing where we were headed. Now, a couple of things happen. When you look at 80 in Hebrew, it's the word pay. Now, pay is a Passover word. So it's the same word, Pesach. Dutch teaches on it very well, and it is linked with this whole season we've entered in. Not just an era, not just a year, but we've entered into a Passover era. And so the Lord is sending us into this time where we're seeing that. So I knew this Passover would be a key marker. Then I looked at another word that was really interesting linked with pay, and it means to number. Well, that is a Pakad word, which also means that we're in a census time. Both of those two words are linked with plague. And it brought me to, just by the Spirit saying, by Passover, we'll be in some plague-like condition. And but that wasn't my real focus in what I'm doing now. Charisma has finished this book. It comes out on May the 12th. It's called The Passover Prophecies. And my real issue, Mike, and I think you and Cindy know me as well as anybody, was a financial, economic issue that I began to look at very, very carefully, because I knew Passover was linked with a financial shift, where Egypt had to give back what they had taken from God's people in that land. So I started saying, okay, now, are we coming into a greed season? Or are we coming into a transference of wealth season? Now, I began to study that very, very intently. And I said to the Lord, I said, Lord, you've got to show me exactly what you're doing here. And many of you know I've written 3 books linking our time frames back to China. So China has been a focus for me since the 1980s. And I started watching China very carefully. So being in, as Rick was saying, being in China in October, November, I started saying there's something really up this year with what's going on in China. We've got to watch. He told me to watch 3 nations very carefully, including our own. And it was China, Korea, and to watch Israel very, very carefully, because there was going to be government crisis, there was going to be economic crisis, and there were going to be actually political crises that would overwhelm us if we didn't watch carefully. So in that, I started watching carefully. And so this Passover word kept drawing me toward the economic shift. When this pandemic hit coming out of China, I said, Lord, you have really ordained a time, and I liked what James said, to reset us. And yet that's going to have some grave consequences for some. It's going to cause the nations, as Rick was saying, to be threshed. It's going to cause a realignment of nations. It is going to cause a move of the Spirit of God like we've never seen. But one of the groups that's going to have the hardest time is going to be the church in adjusting to this. And Cindy, I think you'll remember, and Bishop, I went back to where we started Web Church 14 years ago. Now, that was way before people did web church, and I got so much flack. And remember, Peter had to call a whole symposium for me to try to explain how we couldn't do web church, and how for them to tell me we could not do church on the web. And it was a traumatic time, sort of, from the body of Christ. And when this all started, I said, Lord, thank you. We're all doing church on the web now. So, you know, this is what I want to say. And then I've just got one other thing to say. The prophets have to gird up, and we've got to continue to do things like this so we get a clear sound out. And that's why you guys are so good in mobilizing think tanks like this where we're sharing prophetic revelation. Now, as we entered in, and this will be the last thing, because one of the things I said several points in starting in September, that America, China, and Russia would begin to vie for world control in their economic structures, and it would be a war over it. Another thing was to watch Korea, because in their 70th year since the war, they will become a model nation this year. The other thing was watch Israel, because what is going on there in government will become one of the keys for the apostolic movement in the next season. And Rick, I think you could speak to that. It just came, they just got their government after a year and a half, I think it was, in place. So I began to watch these things that were so key, especially what was happening. So when we entered the year, I said, Lord, what are you saying about 2020? Well, 20 in Hebrew is linked with the hand. And so the Lord said, you're going to have to grab hold of me with one hand, and you're going to have to reach out for a new portion with the other hand. And then he said, tighten your belt. And I thought, well, I'm not hearing that from other prophets, to tighten our belt. What are you saying? I knew it was a depression phrase that we had. I knew that it was something very key for us to understand. But immediately I thought about a roller coaster. And when you get on a roller coaster, they say, tighten your belt. And I saw that roller coaster when it would go straight down. And the Lord said, lots of highs and lows. When you hit the low, get ready. That's how I will help you redo your financial structures. And so I really began to watch that in January. And so I want to say this, we have gone through probably our greatest financial rearrangement as we have known for as a nation. And with that, we had a bubble in this nation, and the bubble has burst. That's not a bad thing, people, because bubbles are very fragile to start with. Second of all, we've got this dynamic of having to realign our financial structures, be alert in our financial structures, and move forward. And especially because lending will not be the same when we come out of this. It will be totally different than what we've known before, especially if you'll remember, guys, going to the Federal Reserve System and going to Jekyll Island. It will not be the same as we've known. Another thing that was so key for us to understand was how we were to allow the Lord, and I've seen so many things the Lord has done in this, to redo church. I mean, he's had to redo church for us because we had gotten comfortable in the way we worship. We never want to get totally comfortable in the way we worship, so he's had to redo it. And one of the things we're doing, I know Rick does 24/7, we're doing the watches, and I'm trying to bring people into an understanding because so many have a hard time jumping into 24/7, but I'm trying to help them break it up by watch. So we've done 6 watches so far, and we'll do the 4 night watches again, which will help people. Then they're getting this mentality of the Tabernacle of David being restored for this season. Now, with that restoration, we have new wealth structures, we have new war structures, and we have a new move of the glory of God. Now, the last thing I will say is I have watched also for the enemy taking advantage, where he's taking advantage. He will do anything, and I'm sure some of you will speak to this, to make sure our government does not continue to keep addressing issues that have needed to be addressed over the last, I would say, I'm really going to say the last 30 years. And with that, I believe there is a real ploy involved in this to stop our economic rearrangement from occurring, as James was saying. And therefore, prophets have to watch, we have to decree, and we have to be ready to speak when God tells us. And again, I can't thank you guys enough for pulling us together like this, because, you know, these are the people, all of these on this screen, Bishop, Mike, Cindy, you know, that's who I submit into. And I really appreciate hearing your voices, and we appreciate all you joining with us out there.
Thank you. Chuck is always very insightful. You know, I pulled from that the restoration of the Tabernacle of David. Some of you may not know what we're referring to, meaning that during David's time, there's 24-hour prayer and worship. And so powerful season, powerful word. And the Lord had given me a word that I was talking to a financial planner, and the Lord said that Wall Street's going to go through a severe course correction. Now, he didn't say to me that we were going to go into a depression. And I do want to say we're at a pivotal time right now on which way we will go. And so we've got to intercede. And we've got to not only look at our own personal finances, of course, but we want to also look at the macro level on what God is doing. And I think that's what's happening as we are listening today. And so thank you very much, Chuck. That was so powerful.